and 91.9 on Cayman Brock and Little Cayman. I'm joined in the studio by my co-host, Dr. Amy Hubble, and our guest, Fahmi Qadir. Fahmi is a principal at Safket Capital Management, one of the speakers at today's Cayman Investment Forum, and a Netflix sensation. Fahmi, when you were watching the company Valiant Pharmaceuticals in 2013, what stood out to you that you really couldn't unsee?
Well, at the time, I wasn't in finance. I was working in corporate intelligence focused exclusively within the pharmaceutical industry. And the firm I was with, we basically had an unwritten rule where we would not work with Valiant Pharmaceuticals because of their reputation for being, let's say, questionable ethics. So I was precocious, straight out of school. So I wanted to change their minds. So I had the opportunity to meet with Valiant management, potentially bringing them on as clients. And the second the meeting was over, I just wanted to take a shower. The character, the personality, what they wanted to do, it did not sit well with me. The pharmaceutical sector is very established. You have big global pharma that have business models. They're not perfect. And certainly in some regards, they do take advantage of patients. And there are certainly areas where there are abuses. But Valiant was basically operating as a private equity firm. It was not a pharmaceutical company. It tried to disrupt an industry that was not necessarily ripe for disruption. And that certainly seemed to raise a lot of red flags for us.
And I earlier introduced Fahmi as a Netflix sensation, and I wasn't exaggerating. There's a show called Dirty Money, and it's a documentary series that Dr. Amy here alerted me to. And I'm going to let you jump in, but something that I saw in that show, Fahmi, there was a moment there when you were telling the interviewer that whenever you would raise questions about the balance sheet to other analysts, they would tell you, well, just go talk to the CEO. He'll take care of everything. He'll make you understand. But you just said you went there and your first immediate reaction was disgust. Something was wrong. And why was that? How come you weren't seduced by the glitz, the glamour, the Gulfstream jet?
Well, I think part of that is simply my upbringing in this industry. I'm coming as an outsider, so I never had the traditional path of being an investment banking analyst. And basically, from the start of your career, you get spoon-fed these narratives from these public company management teams, and they'll only give you the rosiest picture that they can possibly give. So there's very little room for questioning. And there isn't necessarily a culture of taking what is publicly stated and pulling it apart, but coming from the outside. And specifically, my experiences, for example, in corporate intelligence, I was seeing how these decisions are being made, where the bodies are buried, how executives handle, financial pressures, and what do they actually do, not what do they tell investors they're doing. So that made me realize that there is a large disconnect between how these companies operate and what Wall Street analysts are actually exposed to. So I never had an opportunity to believe the BS.
Yeah, let's back up a little bit and talk about kind of what you actually do. And you run a short-only hedge fund, right, in New York. And I know this because I watched the documentary, that you kind of have this nickname of being the assassin, right? Which means that you're basically looking for these companies out there that you expect are either fraudulent or not doing what they're supposed to do, or just terrible companies, right? So what does that mean? What does short selling represent for kind of the everyman?
Well, in the market, you have buyers and sellers. We are selling borrowed shares, so someone else's shares. So the idea is I get to make money when the price of those shares that I've sold goes down, because ultimately I have to give those shares back to whoever I borrowed them from. So the only way to make money is if the stock price goes down, and you can only make 100%. That's
right.
if
it can
it
only
goes
go
to zero. But it's unlimited risks. It's an incredibly risky trading strategy. But I would add that I'm a fundamental conviction short seller, so I'm actually looking to pull apart these companies. But short selling, it could be a systematic short selling strategy. It could be algorithmically driven. Not everyone is actually making these discretionary sort of investments based on short positions. It's a very niche
Yeah,
sort
I
of
guess.
strategy.
So how long, or I don't know, it would never be the same, but kind of how long would you spend on a single company, and how deep? When you say that you're really diving deep into these, how deep and how many hours?
Diving into dumpsters.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
So, how do you differentiate yourself? Ultimately, we're looking to capitalize on what I would call informational inefficiencies in the market and also price inefficiencies. So we're trying to find very complex companies that are not necessarily conducive to basic fundamental analysis. So we have to get creative about how we analyze these companies. It's about understanding the whole company narrative. So there are times, the research process is iterative, and there have been times when I've spent thousands of hours analyzing a single company, simply because the way we invest capital is by trying to build an expertise in those companies and know the ins and outs. And to do that, you really have to step away from the computer. Anyone can spend millions of dollars and buy all of the data sets in the world. So how do I compete against those huge mega funds that are doing that? Well, it's going out. It's shoe leather type work where you build up sources, you go to jurisdictions where you can get subsidiary filings. You're speaking to competitors. It's a much more, I would say, human-based research. It's a lot of human intelligence work, which is very interesting for me because I'm coming from a background of mathematics. So generally, I want everything to be a perfect science, but short selling is definitely an art.
Yeah, I Googled what algebraic topology was.
I did not.
Because I in the documentary it said that you gave up a PhD in algebraic topology, which I did not know what that was. But
I couldn't get past spelling it.
I had to copy and paste. But tell us about algebraic topology, just since I brought it up.
Well, specifically what I was going to study, because in my undergrad I studied mathematics and biology, so I wanted to find a way to sort of bridge those two fields. So what I was going to study was knot theory, which is sort of a subfield of algebraic topology, and I was going to apply knot theory to basically understanding the topological structures of DNA and proteins and how that affects their function.
So always healthcare kind of related in this kind of sector.
Yeah, it's sort of just what drives me. I've always been someone that I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities in my life. So my parents always taught me to pay it forward. So I've always been interested in how can I sort of maximize my impact on the world, and what can I do to make the world a better place. So it's always sort of what has driven me.
Yeah, and I think that that's especially interesting because you're a short seller. And short sellers, as you know, have a very kind of poor reputation as being the bottom feeders, and because you're effectively hoping that stocks go down. But you really view your work as kind of vigilante work, right? That you're kind of looking to hold these companies accountable for the things that they're not actually saying in their quarterly filings, or the things that they're trying to hide, or that they're trying to manipulate with their financials and even at dinner we were talking about that constant cycle of quarterly earnings and how important it is to kind of make those earnings look right, even if they aren't exactly right.
Right. So I think short selling often has this bad reputation because of some of the characters that are involved. And sometimes the story becomes about the short seller rather than what the work that they're actually doing. But ultimately, whether you're short selling or you're selling, the price will go down when there is fraud in a company, and fraud is one of the biggest drivers of losses in the market. So as a short seller, we're just trying to identify that before the market does. So hopefully, ultimately, that should minimize the losses that other shareholders face. Because the inevitability is that the stock will go down, whether I short it or not. I'm not actually driving the price down myself.
It's not your fault it goes down.
Exactly. Right. But it leaves me a little bit conflicted simply because these companies are massive. So Valeant, there are thousands of employees at Valeant, for example, and most of them are very good people. They have families. They're doing honest work, and they believe in what they're doing. They believe in the company. Fraud generally is from the top down. So it's going to be a core group of executives that actually create and obfuscate that fraud. But in the process, they're not only harming shareholders, they're harming patients or whoever the end consumer might be, and they're also harming the people that work for them.
One of the quotes that I loved from the documentary was, "What I do is not about making money. Your interest has to be in bringing some of these companies to justice," which I think just underlines what you've been saying, that it's not that you don't think, you don't like the way Apple's reporting their earnings and you want to make money on the struggle of Apple.
There are easier ways to make money than short selling.
Yes, exactly. It's you're looking for liars, fraudsters, and charlatans, and charming people who have fooled a great majority and can lose a lot. As one of our speakers at today's forum, we're going to have the former CFO of Enron. And as we talked last week or 2 weeks ago with Amy, it's not just a loss to the core group, but what you were saying is that so many people lost a substantial amount of their pension savings when that company went down. So it's important work besides just trying to make money.
Right. And I also, I'm a hedge fund manager, so I do have to care about money. So what I like to say is that, my two goals are to be a good fiduciary and to be a good, good at finding fraud. Those are my two main objectives. So I do have to make money ultimately. So that's why I also have to be so careful about what I do short. Oftentimes there are terrible businesses that I know are taking advantage of the general public, but where they are and what I would say the fraud life cycle is not necessarily conducive to me making money. So even with Valeant, I may have known about it in 2013 and 2014, but I only shorted it, late in 2015 because you need to get the timing right. And the way to do that is just to, again, do more work.
Well, we will be taking a break now for a word from our sponsor, but stay with us, as in 60 seconds we will expand our conversation, delve into short selling, your presentation today, and a few other issues with Fahmi Qadir.
Always separate debris from household garbage after a hurricane hits. Debris includes roofing materials, downed tree branches, and metals. All items of debris must be placed in separate piles to the front of the property or at a side that is easily accessible to collection trucks. Debris must be placed in a location that will not cause obstruction to roadways or come in contact with electrical lines. For more post-hurricane waste management tips, visit the DEH website at www.deh.gov.ky.
This is Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Money Sense. Dr. Amy, you had a line of questioning you wanted to pursue.
Yes, I did. Yeah, before the break, Fahmi, you said something that I think stuck with me about how important timing is with short selling. And that really resonated to me because when I want to buy a stock, I buy it, I can just hold it, or if I'm not comfortable with a stock, I just choose not to buy it, or I'll watch it for a while. Making the choice to short a company really means you're borrowing, and anytime you're borrowing, you're having to pay for borrowing it. And then you're kind of just having to sit and hold and then wait that company goes down, which is kind of the same size as buying and selling. But ultimately, you do have to cover that short. And so how do you deal with that, especially in situations where you're talking about companies that on the news every single day, you're getting confirmation back and forth that this is a great company. Their stock price is going up and up and up, and nobody's actually seeing this, and you're kind of crying alone in the desert, knowing that this company is trash, but also holding this short position, waiting for it to go down. How do you deal with that kind of waiting game? Is there a secret to that mental fortitude of blocking it all out?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of portfolio managers will say what keeps them up at night, it's the short side of their portfolios that keeps them up at night, whereas I sleep like a baby every night. And it's a few factors. Okay, what I do and how I approach short selling, it's not for the average investor. You have to be built that way. I think short sellers are, there's something about us. I say, I don't mean this in a bad way, but we're just broken people. There's that chip on our shoulder that drives us to always look where no one else is looking, ask the questions no one else wants to ask. So that is part of it. But really what it comes down to is we do so much work. So when you're spending thousands of hours on a single company, I'm not looking at thousands of companies. My portfolio ideally has, 5 to 10 short positions.
Right.
So when you spend that amount of work understanding a company in and out, on par with the executives of that company, and perhaps even understanding the company better than them, that is what gives you the comfort. But you also have to be mindful and judicious of the risks associated with holding that position. I'm not going to tolerate losses when there's complete uncertainty as far as when I might make a profit. So as a portfolio manager, what's critical is trying to basically narrow the window in which I might be able to realize profits. And there are certain ways to do that. There might be built-in catalysts, let's say fundamentally. So a company might be facing liquidity issues that the market will at some point realize. Or it could be regulatory issues. They might be embroiled in some legal battles, and we can get some sort of sense of timing around that. And there's also work we can do behind the scenes. We're not an activist firm, so we're not publishing research. But I would say we're in some ways passive activists in that we work behind the scenes and try to get the information, the fruits of our labor. We try to get that out to the market one way or the other.
So no second guessing yourself.
Well, one of our other guests at today's forum is Denise Shull, and she works with a lot of investors on the mental side of investing. Because as you said, Fahmi, a lot of professional investors, hedge fund managers in New York City, they are up at night and they're doubting their decisions, and bubbles can go to extreme heights and then double from there, and they're being proven wrong constantly. So there's a lot of the mental game in investing, and it's a lot about character. Mm-hmm. And this, I wanted to ask you both, as you're both successful women, you both own your own businesses, you're in a field that's not dominated by women. I was wondering, because we have obviously a half and half audience, are there any lessons? Amy, is there some line of questioning that you can ask? Is there something about mentorship, about succeeding in finance as a woman that the two of you would like to share or talk about with our audience?
Fahmi and I have had enough time to spend some time in the last day or so, and unfortunately we haven't talked a lot about successes. We've talked a lot about failures and how companies have failed, and we've talked a lot about how we got started. I think what we were even thinking and talking about earlier this morning was, the company Theranos, for example, it was a healthcare company that failed within the last 5 years or so, and they promised that they had this revolutionary blood testing system that was just a finger prick and then a machine, and it all came back right. And it had a very dynamic female CEO in Silicon Valley, which is, as everyone knows, very rare. And so you then you have a company that ultimately that was a complete fraud. Yes, you did the finger prick, but then you were sending it back in, and they were using other people's and other companies' machines to actually test it. And none of the things that were being promised by this very dynamic, very young, blonde woman that was being put in front of millions of investors, everyone. She was the darling. She's on magazine covers, and I feel like she was a pioneer for us, but then she turned out to be a complete fraud. And I felt personally victimized by that just as a woman.
She let you down.
She let me down a little bit in that we're fighting so hard to kind of be represented at that C-level suite, especially in Silicon Valley. And so that was kind of a big disappointment for me. But what would you think about that? Did you ever get a chance to meet her or work with that company at all?
Well, it was a private company, but it really showed, the work, everything that John Carreyrou did and the whistleblowers. It really showed how hard it is to actually identify fraud and the risks involved with that. But you can have sociopaths, or it's gender neutral. You can have
right.
men and women that are sociopathic, and sometimes I'm incredibly skeptical of anyone who is coming out and saying they're going to change the world and they're going to disrupt industries, but they don't really have a concrete plan of what they're trying to do. I was skeptical of the Elizabeth Holmes story from the beginning, and I always had said, one day she's going to end up in jail. So she did. But it just goes to show fraud is equal opportunity.
Yeah. I'm not sure that was your question, Emil, but
no, that's okay.
I do think that being a woman, I think, kind of adds an additional dynamic almost that they're almost more trustworthy, I think, maybe in the public eye or something that's said by a woman versus something that is said by a man.
But I bet in this industry, both of you have to work harder than the average male counterpart in your positions. And I bet it comes through in your work as you're both successful.
Yeah, it's possible that you do have to maybe present yourself a little bit differently. And I think for me, it was getting education a little bit. But also, I don't want to discount men either. Most of my mentors have been men, and they've all been wonderful to me. And I think a dynamic workforce that has a lot of diversity on both sides is what's going to be best for any company going forward.
Fahmi, you have a presentation later today. It's going to be sensational. If anyone's listening right now and they haven't signed up online, you can still sign up to go to the Cayman Investment Forum, or you can pay at the desk. It's going to be at the Ritz-Carlton. What are you going to talk about at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock? What time, Amy, does it start?
Lunch starts at 11:45.
So lunch is great, but
we might be
the
out of
show
food,
is Fahmi. Fahmi, what are you going to be talking about? Give us a rough outline. What can the audience expect?
Yeah, so I'm basically going to talk about how investors can take some of the tools that I use as a short seller to identify fraud in their own investing practices. Because every shareholder can hold companies accountable. In fact, shareholders can do a much better job of it than me as a short seller, because you have voting powers in your companies. And I think shareholder responsibility and actually being a mindful shareholder, I think it's becoming a sort of a lost art. So there's a lot as far as questions that you can ask and, basically actions you can take in order to catch these companies committing fraud and really prevent it from becoming a larger problem.
I just had a question pop into my head, and we only have about a minute and a half. So you've been doing this at least since 2013, but it sounds like your whole life you've been sensing, you've had this character for it. Do you find that the level of fraud in finance, in society, is constant, or does it come in waves? And if it does come in waves, where are we in the cycle, the societal cycle? More fraud, less fraud?
I think it is constant. What does change is the size of the frauds. And, when you're in a easy money world, the frauds just get a lot bigger and they go on for a lot longer. But the number of frauds, I would say it's a constant because ultimately that comes down to human nature.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and they call Valiant the Enron of pharmaceuticals, right? And obviously we have representative from Enron speaking right after you today, which is a perfect mix. But he went to jail; those guys went to jail. Valiant is still in business under a different name. Mm-hmm. Those guys didn't go to jail. What gives?
Yeah, there's a really great book by Jesse Eisinger called The Chicken Shit Club, and I would recommend anyone who's interested in issues of regulatory capture, corporate governance, and prosecution of white collar crime should read it. But basically, we're in a world where we have a lot of great regulations and protections for consumers, but none of it is actually being acted on. We allow these corporations to continue because it's very hard to prosecute a corporation because it's not an actual person. So prosecutors have generally shied away from sending people to jail. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy for the market because there's no cost to committing fraud anymore.
Right.
That is an entire show right there.
For sure.
But unfortunately, Fahmi, we are out of time. This happens every other week. There's simply not enough time for us to delve in further. Fahmi, on behalf of Amy and our audience, I thank you for joining us and sharing your insight and perspective.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Everyone, you've just listened to Money Sense. As a reminder, today's recording will be available as a podcast on the CFA Society Cayman Islands website and on all your favorite Apple and Android podcasting apps. You can send us show ideas at moneysense@cndw.ky and via Twitter at MoneySense Radio. We'll be back in a fortnight with a new episode of Money Sense.
Does our behavior influence investment decisions? What is the role of the brain in financial decision making? Find this out and more as Talk Today hits the road. Today, October 17th, at the Ritz-Carlton for the Cayman Investment Forum, in partnership with the CFA Society Cayman Islands. Tune in to Radio Cayman from 12:15 until 2 p.m. as we bring you the highlights from the guest speakers of this year's Cayman Investment Forum, happening today, October 17th.